Last night, I said that I would like to make this lecture series complete enough so that those who cannot be with us in the closed class can, if they wish, take up the study themselves at home. And so I will just give you a brief outline of the order of study to reach or to attain the best results. First of all, are you all hearing me? It is difficult for me to know how to adjust my voice with this machine. I don't like mechanical voices. But in order to have it carry across to the overflow room, it is necessary to use this. Since our main object in this work is the attaining of that transcendental consciousness of which we have been speaking, that spiritual consciousness or Christ consciousness, the first step is to attain a contact, actually a conscious contact, with our source. And this, of course, is always found within our own consciousness, and therefore is best attained through meditation. Because meditation is difficult, it has been my experience that it becomes simple if we start with practicing the presence of God, that is, bringing ourselves to a state of consciousness in which, from rising in the morning until retiring at night, we find ways of remembering God in the sense of acknowledging God as the life and as the law unto our being, acknowledging God as the substance of our activities, acknowledging God as the intelligence, the love, in fact, the all of our existence. Now, this is exemplified in our book, Practicing the Presence, and that book leads to the next one, The Art of Meditation. By the time these two books have been studied and practiced, it is inevitable that a true student will want to know enough of the principles of healing, not only to better enable themselves to be healed, but also to develop a healing consciousness. Therefore, the next book in order would be The Art of Spiritual Healing, and then The Infinite Way. After these, the books may be read or studied in any order that one finds convenient or to which one is led. For the benefit of those who do not have all of the writings, it is possible to secure these books at the public libraries here in Los Angeles. In fact, some years ago, I know that the main library was supplied with at least a half a dozen copies of every title. What the situation is, I do not know now, but if there should be any shortage of these books, it can easily be remedied. We also have some pamphlets which are helpful because they take up work from specific angles. As for instance, the secret of the 23rd Psalm and deep silence of my peace are found most helpful for beginners. They are found helpful for starting one's thinking along the mystical path. And then from there on, of course, one suits oneself in that direction until they come to our deepest writings, which are the fourth dimension, and possibly love and gratitude. With this idea in mind, I have left a list at the book table, and anyone may refer to it for reference or to copy it down. In our first two nights, we have led up to the subject announced for tonight, which is the subject of prayer or treatment. In the infinite way, these words are not necessarily synonymous. In fact, I do not think of prayer and treatment as synonyms. You may find the distinction a small one. I find it quite a large one. In thinking of these two, I would take treatment first, because to me, prayer is the deepest subject in all spiritual and mystical literature, certainly the deepest experience in spiritual living. Treatment may fall into a different category because there are so many different forms of treatment, and none of these necessarily has to barge over into the realm of prayer. First of all, why do we have a subject like treatment? When, from every spiritual standpoint, there is certainly nobody to be treated and nothing to give a treatment to. I have told this story before, and I'm more than happy tonight to repeat it, that in my earliest days in the healing practice, I knew nothing of the subject of treatment, and all healing work was done by merely closing the eyes and waiting until a feeling of release or peace came within me, and that was the end of what we now call treatment work. It wasn't treatment, it was just an inner waiting for the Spirit to announce itself. However, all of those whom I met in this work were very busily at work with treatments, and some of these treatments, I was told, had 3 steps, and some 5 steps, and some 7 steps. Nobody seemed to be agreed on what a treatment consists of, but one thing was certain: there was lots of it. And this not only had me puzzled, but it had me disturbed, because I felt that perhaps there's something I don't know, or something I very well must know, for I don't want to fall down on this job. And so we learned that through meditation, the correct letter of truth is revealed, and it is this correct letter of truth, held in consciousness, remembered, declared, stated, repeated, which in its turn forms a whole new state of consciousness within us and brings us to the actual demonstration of a healing consciousness. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. But remember, you must know the truth, and it must really be the truth, not an assortment of statements about the truth, and not a mixture of truth teachings, but truth itself must be known, the correct letter of truth. For many years I devoted myself to meditation on this very subject so that I might know specific principles of healing, so that I might know what healed, why it healed, what made possible the healings. And I'm glad now that I spent those years in that way, because what I learned has been of such value to students that it has carried this work around the world. First of all, I learned that God does not heal disease, that God is not a healer of disease, that God knows nothing about disease, and if God could heal a disease, God would have done it yesterday and not waited for today. Also, if God were healing disease, God would never wait until you just found the right teacher or the right teaching or the right book or the right practitioner. In other words, it isn't the function of God to heal. The function of God is to be God, to express itself in all of its infinite spiritual glory, and it is forever doing this. Healing work has to do not with God, but with man. That man who is of the earth, earthy, the creature, who is not under the law of God, neither indeed can be, and in order to be whole, must get back to the kingdom of God, must be reestablished consciously in God, must become one with God, or as Paul tells us, have that Spirit of God dwell in you so that you may be the child of God. Therefore, treatment has nothing to do with bringing God down to our bodies or business or homes. It has nothing to do with bringing God to a disease. Treatment, as we understand it, is aimed at lifting ourselves above the realm of appearances into the atmosphere of God, where God is of too pure eyes to behold iniquity, and therefore there is no iniquity. There is no sin, no disease, no death, no lack, no limitation. Now, just merely to make statements that there is no error and there is no accident or there is no disease is nonsense, because in the realm of the human there is plenty of these. It is only as we rise above the realm of the human mind, only as we rise above the realm of good and evil and reach into that atmosphere of God, that we find it is literally true. There is no disease, there is no age, there is no change, there is no death, there is no limitation. But to attain that healing, we must rise into that atmosphere or realm, and if we're to heal ourselves, We must attain some measure of that mind that was in Christ Jesus. If we are to be healed by another, it will only be if we find another who has risen into the atmosphere of God, the realm of God, the spiritual consciousness where discords dissolve, evaporate, disappear, and are seen no more. Treatment, therefore, is the conscious knowledge or awareness or declaration or statement of the specific principle which constitute a healing message. In the infinite way, the two major principles that base the healing work are these. First, the nature of God. Second, the nature of evil, error of any name or nature. Therefore, our treatment would first of all be the realization of God as one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. God is infinite and God is one. God is life. Therefore, there is only one infinite life. That life is God. Therefore, life must be eternal, harmonious, spiritual, perfect, omnipresent, where I am. God is power. God is one power. God is infinite power, eternal power. Therefore, God must be the only power. The only power. What about this sin, false appetite, disease? What about this unemployment, this unhappiness, this loneliness? What about this fear? God is one, therefore power is one, therefore there can only be one power, and that power must be spiritual. Therefore, there can be no power in that which is called the sins, the diseases, the death, the lack, the limitations, the accidents, the inheritances of this world. Only one power, only one life. Another word comes, law. Law. Somebody says, I'm suffering from a law of infection, a law of contagion, a law of heredity, a law of climate, a law of weather. But truth says, God is the lawgiver, God is the law, God is spirit. Therefore, law must be spiritual. And since there can only be one God, there can only be one law. And that must be spiritual law. Therefore, that which the world calls material law, mental law, laws of weather, laws of economics, these cannot be law. These are but the arm of flesh or nothingness. These are the mistaken beliefs of man who has accepted two powers, the power of good and the power of evil. But can there be two powers if God is one? Likewise, God is omnipresence, all presence. Therefore, where I am, God is. And Scripture tells us that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. In other words, there can be no such thing as bondage to either material laws or mental laws. There can be no bondage to material sense or mental sense. There can be no bondage to time or tide or condition. No bondage to calendars. In this way, then, those who have studied the Scriptures and the metaphysical writings that are based on Scripture, these know enough of these statements of truth to constitute a treatment, and more especially understanding the nature of God as one, the nature of God as Spirit, the nature of God as the only law. It is a simple thing to formulate a treatment based on the realization of God. Having done this, our treatment takes its next step, and that is this. One of the earliest discoveries that I made in the earliest days of my practice was this: that error of any name or nature is not personal. There is no one in this world responsible for their own ills. It makes no difference whether an individual is a sinner of the deepest dyed red. It makes no difference what the name or nature of their disease or of the false appetite which may at any moment be controlling them. It is not their fault, and they are not to be held responsible, and they are not to be asked to change their ways. It is not their wrong thinking that has made them ill. It is not their ancestry that has done it, or the wrong thinking of their parents or grandparents. It is not the errors of their race or their religion that has done it. As a matter of fact, there is no reason for their ill which had its origin in them. All evil has its source in the impersonal belief named in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, the acceptance of the belief in two powers. That is where all error has its rise. And if you would lay the axe at the root of all evil, you will never judge, criticize, or condemn yourself, your patient, or your student. You will adopt the attitude of the Master when he was faced with the gravest crime in all of the Hebrew church. In case you think it's murder, it isn't. The greatest crime in the Hebrew church is adultery. And it is punishable by the same punishment as that of murder. Stoning to death. That's how serious adultery is in the Hebrew faith. And the Master, with a woman taken in adultery, says, "Neither do I condemn you." Please remember that whenever you are called upon for a healing for yourself, for a patient, for a student, for a relative, regardless of what you know about them humanly, please remember the attitude to be in accord with spiritual revelation must be, "Neither do I condemn thee." Go and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon thee. But right now, neither do I condemn thee. And the cross, the thief on the cross, I say to you, I will take you with me into paradise this very night. Not wait for you to suffer it out, not wait for you to work through generations of karma, but right now, tonight, while you are repentant of your sin, your scarlet sin is now white as snow. Once you are able to discern that all evil is impersonal, you will find how wonderful the healing work is, how quickly it can be accomplished in most cases, and how painlessly it is arrived at. Why? Because you never have to take your patient into your thought. When you never have to name your patient, you never have to take the disease into your mind, you never have to name it, you don't even have to know what it is, you don't even have to know the name of the patient that is calling upon you for help. I've brought this out many, many times that in the case of women, we can't know their name, except those that are still single. There's always a married name or the second married name, or the third. So how and what use is a name? When an individual asks you for help, they have made a contact with your consciousness. Now, if your consciousness is imbued with truth, that is, if you are dwelling in the realization of the infinite omnipresent nature of God, and if you are living in the realization that all evil, regardless of its name and nature, is an impersonal universal belief in two powers, you have almost completed your treatment, even without giving a treatment. You see, these forms of treatment, such as I'm going through tonight, are those that we use perhaps in the first year of our study until we know these truths so thoroughly that they are part of our very being. And then, when we're called for help, we don't have to rehearse all of this treatment. We can jump to it like we can 12 times 12 or 144. Why go through 2 times 2 and 2 times 1 and 1 times 2 and 1 time and then add them all up, when quick as a wink you can say 144. So it is in the early stages of your study. You must know the nature of God, and you must know it in 1,000 different ways. Then you must know the nothingness of every appearance of sin, disease, and death. I don't mean by individual name, but I do mean that when you come to a season of grip and flu and cold, that you know enough to know that you don't have to sit down and give treatments for it. It is enough to know once and for all that this is a universal belief in two powers, an arm of flesh or nothingness, and then go about your business and forget it, and see how quickly you prove it. As long as you do not personalize good and do not personalize evil, you will find healing work to be one of the greatest joys on earth. And as lots of my students have told me, when they first start to heal, they feel ashamed to take the money. They did so little for it. It is literally true. Healing work is not difficult, except in the few cases that really seem to resist all of the knowing for one reason or another, and it is those few cases that really take most of your time. It is safe to say that 80% of all the cases that come to you, no matter how numerous they may be, will take little or no time. It is the other 10 or 20% that really takes time and effort, because for reasons too numerous to mention in this brief space of time, they do not yield. And Perhaps the Master said it, this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting, and you have to do a lot of praying and a lot of fasting for some of those cases. Now, whether you sit down for 10 or 15 minutes to rehearse this nature of God and nature of error, which constitutes your treatment, or whether some months have gone by and you are so familiar with the writings and these principles that you have it all at your fingertips and need only perhaps 1 or 2 minutes for a treatment, there still remains the most important part of the treatment, and that is the part that takes place after you have consciously known whatever truth you are going to know. That part of the treatment consists of this. When you have declared whatever truth you're going to declare, whenever you have known the allness of God and the nothingness of that appearance which is tempting you, you then must have a brief minute or two for sitting very still and adopting the attitude of, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," and then open your ears as if you were actually expecting to hear something. Really, this is only symbolic of opening the inner ear, that is, becoming alert within in case the still small voice speaks to you. Whether it speaks audibly, whether you just receive an impression, or whether you merely have a deep breath or a feeling of warmth, there does come some kind of an inner assurance, some kind of an inner stirring which tells you that the treatment is complete or God is on the scene, that something is stirring. And there your treatment can end. When it does, you're through with that case until or unless later that person comes back to your thought, or they telephone or write or telegraph and indicate that the healing has not been completed, sometimes even that it hasn't been started so far as they're aware. You may have to do this again, and you may have to do it again and again. But eventually, you will come to that place of inner conviction and know that the work is completed, it's done, it's finished, and then you will quickly find that it is so. Now, I bring this to your attention for this reason. It has been clear to me for all of the years of my work that it is not the truth that we know with our mind that does the healing work. The truth that we know with our mind, the truth that we declare, affirm, that merely lifts us above the atmosphere of sense into a consciousness in which spiritual truth can be discerned or apprehended, or the spirit be felt. In other words, our treatment is not for the purpose of healing anyone. It is for the purpose of lifting ourselves into an atmosphere where there is no one to be healed. Now, since treatment, the entire subject of treatment, is as individual as it is, much of this that I have said may be of no use to you. Some of it may be of use for a short while. But in the 14 years in which I've been teaching this work, I have embraced in my writings the sense of treatment, the idea of treatment that has revealed itself in so many different forms that somewhere within those writings is the particular way, perhaps, most helpful to you. Only be sure that you use none of it for a formula. Be sure that you use none of it as if it were gospel truth, for there is no such thing as gospel truth in a book. The only truth there is that which is revealed to you within your own consciousness. And the truth, the statements of truth that you read in the books, these are merely the tools that we use for lifting ourselves to where truth can reveal itself to us within our own being. Therefore, do not be tied down by formulas. Certainly do not be tied down by particular methods, but rather use these as helps in developing your own state of consciousness, because ultimately you will discover that just as there may be 4 billion people on earth, so actually there must be 4 billion individuals, each one capable of receiving direct impartation and illumination from the Father within you. That is why the Master said, if I go not away, the Comforter cannot come to you. And so it is that eventually you must rise above teachers, teachings, books, to where you receive your impartations from the same source that all of our spiritual writers have received their inspiration from within their own being. And the true teachers of the world, in whatever part of the world I have met them, have all agreed on this, that the only function of a teacher and a teaching is to assist the student, the seeker, to rise to that level of consciousness where they too make conscious union with God and thereafter receive their impartations, their teaching, their instruction from the Father within. It is for this reason that in our work, our practitioners and teachers are distinctly taught that no one is our patient or student 1 minute after they have asked for help. In other words, when they ask for help, at that moment they are your patient, give it to them. 1 minute later they are free to go anywhere they want, to anyone they want, at any time. There must be no hold of any nature, physical, material, or mental, on a patient or student. Everyone should be released in God instantly, so that there is no bond between us but a spiritual one. This is stated on the front page of every book and booklet of the Message of the Infinite Way. Spiritual truth, spiritual illumination reveals that there is a bond between every one of us, but it is a spiritual one, and therefore it carries with it no obligation, no duties. There is an obligation from the practitioner to the patient, from the student, from the teacher to the student, to impart the utmost, to live and move and have their being, I'm speaking of the practitioner and teacher, constantly in God consciousness, so that when the patient or student reaches out, the practitioner or teacher will be found ready in spiritual consciousness, but the patient and the student is instantly freed. And there is no obligation, and there is no tie, and each one is free to remain or to go. Always understand that, and you will begin to understand why it is that we have so much unhappiness in our human relationships. We hold each other too much in bondage. We hold each other in fetters of human ties, and we believe that because we're parents or children or husbands or wives, that we really possess somebody. And if we don't say it in words, we surely do in actions. And in that very act of possession, we lose them. It is only in the act of spiritually freeing every member of our family and of our business relationships that we bind them to us in love. But it's a spiritual bond and not a material one. So we come naturally. First, let me just say that this subject of treatment will be found enlarged upon and presented in many different ways throughout the writings. Now we come to the subject of prayer. And prayer, of course, is the most sacred part of all spiritual living. There are three, we'll say at least three stages of prayer. The first, and that one which belongs primarily to the seeker, is a contemplative form of prayer. It is a prayer in which we are quiet within and contemplate God, contemplate reality, contemplate whatever we know of spiritual truth. We find it very helpful at times to contemplate the spiritual realities in terms of nature. In other words, by observing how spiritual power and presence operates in the kingdom of plant life, flowers, trees, fruits, vegetables, the natural world. Not because God is in the natural phenomena, heaven forbid, but that by seeing through the appearance, we begin to perceive the invisible acts of God which appear visibly as forms of nature. In other words, let no one believe for a moment that God is in a tree or in a flower or in a physical body or even in the stars and the sun and the moon. God is not in this universe as pantheism might sometimes make it appear to us. Actually, God is invisible and forever remains invisible, and therefore that which is visible is not the spiritual kingdom, but represents our concept of the spiritual kingdom, and the spiritual kingdom is never seen with the eyes or heard with the ears. The spiritual kingdom is spiritually discerned through your fourth dimensional consciousness, your attained spiritual consciousness. In other words, we have, and I have used this term, soul faculties. We have soul faculties which enable us to perceive reality, so that as I look out at you, be assured I am not aware of your bodies. Oh, I see them, they're in my eyes, but I am not aware of them, nor am I aware of you as a person, but I can discern you. You, a spiritual being, that which you call I. If you will, just close your eyes for a minute, a second really, or 2 seconds, and say to yourself the word I. I. Now that I is your real identity, and we out here can't see it. We can only see your body. We can only see the form that you have assumed, but we can't see you, for you are that individual you have just named, I. I am so far hidden inside of me that even my mother has never seen me. No one can see me, for I am within myself, and what I am really, the deepest part of me, I never reveal to anyone, and I'm sure you don't. I am sure that even though you are married, there is a part of you that you never have disclosed or revealed to your husband or your wife, to your mother or your child. Each one of us has a center within ourselves that we would no more reveal to this world than we would walk out at Hollywood and Vine stark naked. And we wouldn't do that. Now, this I that is within you is your true identity. Someday, if you remain on this path, you will know exactly what and who I am. But until then, you may safely accept the fact that when you say I, you are speaking of yourself, of your identity, of that part of you which is eternal, that part which is infinite, that part which was never born. As your body came into the world, it came along with it, but as you pass from this world in what the world calls death or passing on, you will find that I will go right with you. In other words, you will not remain behind, but being I, you will find that you never were inside of a body. You never were inside of your bed. You never have been confined to space. You'll only know this after you're on the spiritual path long enough to get acquainted with the I that I am. The I that Moses met. The I that Jesus met. The I that John tells about. You are that I. That is why you call yourself I. And that is why I know that I am. Because if I weren't, I wouldn't be knowing I am. And it's because I am that I know that I am. And it's because I know that I am that I know that that amness was, is, and forever will be. And so in our very first stages of prayer, we contemplate in silence and in secrecy the nature of God. You will remember that the Master cautioned us, do not pray to be seen of men. Prayer is something too sacred for that. Do your praying, even if you're in church or temple or synagogue or center, do your praying silently and secretly within yourself. Make it a secret and sacred relationship between you and the Father, and watch. The very first demonstration you will make is this. That which your Father seeth in secret, you will demonstrate outwardly and openly. If you do your praying to be seen of men, if you give alms so that somebody may know about it, and to what extent and to where it goes, you'll get lots of credit from your fellow man. He loves that. All you lose is the credit from God. And the Master has said this. Do not pray to be seen of men, and do not give your alms to be seen of men. Do it secretly within yourself and watch, and you will find that there is a presence within you, closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, that knows everything that is taking place within you and rewardeth openly. This we call contemplative prayer, contemplative meditation sometimes, and it leads ultimately to a deeper realm of prayer. This we call communion. There arrives at a time after you have known contemplative prayer when a presence reveals itself to you within you. You become aware, actually, that you are not alone, that you're not talking to yourself, that you're not imagining things, but that actually there is a something within you. Sometimes you might locate it as if it were between your breastbones or in your heart. It isn't anywhere localized in your body. It merely appears to be that way. Actually, it is an area of your consciousness. It is within you. And you will find that the Master spoke truly when he said, "The Father within me." The Master was always aware of the Father within me. That is why he was always in communion with the Father. And later Paul demonstrated it when he said, "I live, yet not I. Christ liveth me. Christ indwelleth me." The indwelling Christ, again you see, within me, I in him and he in me, I am in the Father and the Father is in me, for we are one. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Right here and now is both I and the Father, for I and the Father is not two, but one, although the Father is greater than I. And so there comes this period of communion, when you know that the Father is within you, when you learn now to listen for that still small voice, listen for guidance, direction, and whenever a need appears, whether it's a physical or a mental or a moral or financial need, you don't look out here for it. You turn within, knowing that this presence is really the substance of the demonstration that is to appear. This presence within you is the substance and the law and the activity of that which is to appear outwardly as supply or companionship or food or clothing or housing or transportation or capital for the business or a new idea or a new invention or a new piece of music or a new design of art or bridges or houses or office buildings. Whatever is to appear outwardly, the presence of God within you is the very essence and substance and activity and law unto it. And by your communion with it, within, it appears outwardly as form. This is perhaps the longest period of our spiritual journey. And ultimately it leads to what may be the final stage, that of union, in which at a given moment there takes place a conscious union or conscious oneness with God, in which all sense of limitation falls away, all sense of finiteness, and then you hear the Master saying, "Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. I am the wine. I am life eternal. I am the way. I am the truth. All that God is, I am. All that the Father hath is mine, for I and the Father are one." This is the stage that has been reached by every mystic. And those who have attained to that degree of spiritual living called the mystical life are those who more or less are able to walk in and out at will. Those who are always in communion with God and whenever occasion demands can attain conscious union with God. You can see, I hope, that treatment in and of itself is only a step leading up to a state of consciousness in which treatment as such is no longer necessary. All that is needed is a conscious realization of the truth that you have been imbibing, that you have been receiving within, almost you may say, from the first day that you found your first book of truth. Always remember this: you cannot, at any part of your spiritual life, gauge your progress. The only person of whom you can be sure is not making spiritual progress is the one who is rejoicing in their spiritual progress. Be assured you have found the one person who hasn't touched the path, because the very moment that you have your first realization of the nature of spiritual life and spiritual being, you will see how many billion light years away you are from it as a human being, and you never again will claim progress toward it, but your whole life will be lived in more or less the feeling of, please God, can't it be soon that I make a start at least? We become so aware of how far we are as humans from our Christ identity and realization that we're too busy trying to attain it, too busy to have any feeling that we're getting close to it.